Welcome to another episode of I'm Ready to Face the Mirror. My name is Lolly. This is a dear friend of mine, Nico. Nico, say hi.
Hello to the Lollyverse.
Yeah, to the Lollyverse. Yeah, well, that'll be a topic. And so
Oh,
he
indeed.
calls it the Lollyverse, is kind of my network and the people that I have built and grown, and all the ways in which I have navigated life before and after brain injury, just being me. So the purpose of this series in these episodes is that as a brain injury survivor, I have learned that there is not a lot of real good, open, vulnerable conversation between the brain injury survivor and the caregivers and the people in their life. Everyone's kind of talking around each other. No one's really talking to each other. And I think that there is, some very powerful insight to be had there. And, as a brain injury survivor, I oftentimes cannot accept my reality. And so here I am starting 8 years of this journey, and I'm ready to hear how my brain injury has impacted those in my life. So, what I'm doing is I'm starting to interview people who have been in my life before brain injury, have been a part of my life after brain injury. As I talk about often, I got rid of the people who were committed to misunderstanding me and only allow people in my tribe. I'm very intentional in those ways that people who want to try to understand me and will love and support me in the ways that I reciprocate that back to them. So, Nico is a dear friend of mine. He was a colleague at Revive You Wellness Spa when I worked there doing my sensory deprivation salt floats. And Nico got to, or Nicholas, I always give him a lot of shit about that. He knew me as a client before he knew me as, a colleague and a friend. Now we became friends while I was a client, while I was coming in doing my sensory deprivation salt floats and my hyperbaric oxygen therapies and my sound vibration beds. But then it got to a point to when I became an employee. So I kind of want to ask you, what was it like to, kind of share your perspective, what you knew of me before, maybe like how that shifted afterwards. Except kind of give me a little bit of insight of what that experience has been like from you, just from the very beginning, and then we can get deeper into some other parts of it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I was kind of getting a little nostalgic thinking about one of our first conversations ever. Floating, I think, is a really cool modality for many reasons, but after it does prime one for very good conversations. And I
Yes, it
remember a
does.
couple of our a couple of our first nice conversations. But from an outside view, just seeing you kind of interface with other clients and whatnot, and more from afar, I viewed you as someone who was very charismatic, very articulate, had a lot of things, together, doing a lot of different things, very active. So, when you meet someone in a little closer proximity, you kind of see the whole scope of what they do in their routine and in their day. So that's been kind of cool to see unfold, like what sorts of, routines or therapies or other stuff kind of bolster your impact on the world, or how you interface with the world. So that's something I've kind of learned over time. But I was recalling one of our first ever conversations after a float. I remember you were sitting there in a chair, very poised in an interesting fashion, and we were kind of just exchanging, talking about some basic life stuff. And I said thank you for sharing that with me, because as you usually do as a conversationalist, you're sharing some words of wisdom or some kind of cool remarks. You are a very articulate poet as well, which is enjoyed, hearing that, parked throughout conversations. But I remember thanking you for our conversation, and you said, "Thank you for listening. Not everybody does." And that was something that I thought really
Uh,
kicked off a lot of perspective shifts in either, you know, looking at how I share and spread my own energy with how other people receive it. I've always, just tried to push everything to the nine regardless. But one of those first conversations really had me thinking about how to spend my energy, where to spend my energy. And I was like, wow, I can't remember the last time someone said thank you just for listening. So that speaks with me and sat with me, obviously, even today, a couple years later. Wow, that time has flown actually. But yeah,
It
I
it
thought that
really
was really
has flown.
yeah, really cool jumping off point of, even just reciprocity. I know that's a word that I think is really key, and especially in the TBI should be key in every world, but stepping into some of the TBI spaces, how you spend and exchange your energy, and where you choose to focus, I think is a key, because a lot of those um, avenues that folks with TBI experience, I think is a really good framework for everybody. But with TBI, it's a little more um, pronounced, if that makes sense. Brain battery, how you invest and spend your energy.
All right. Yeah. So, I mean, what I hear is that you start to see a lot of correlation, not just through brain injury, but into other aspects in other people's lives, like mental health, mental illnesses, and invisible illnesses and stuff like that. And I think it's a very powerful perspective for people to hear that just in our natural engagement, that, you know, I was intentionally giving you, positive reinforcement as somebody in society that I'm interacting with, and I'm used to people not listening, and that will never stop me from expressing. So, and I just said thank you for listening. So, that is a big testament to a part of our experience. And so, you would hear me beforehand as a client. I would express about my brain injury and why I was there and some of the struggles that were going on. And then once I became an employee, you really started to see the day to day, the real aspects. Like you said, when you first met me, you're like, man, this guy has it together. I did not have it together at all. Like I
Yeah,
was in the
yeah,
middle of my divorce. I was like, I had it together in the directions that I needed to move. And I had it together in that I was very much taking care of myself and dedicating intentional time and effort into self care. But like my life was complete disarray. And so like, and people don't see brain injury survivors a lot of the times, especially the high functioning ones. You don't see the symptoms in the ways that when you start working with me, you start to see the symptoms. And having
right.
somebody like me who's a little bit more articulate, that's a little bit more expressive and communicative to, as a colleague, kind of like, what was that kind of like as you started to see more of, oh shit, like this is what he's really experiencing, and maybe like give an example of like one of the first times you really saw like my symptoms show up in a way you had never seen it, and you're like, oh wow, this guy really does have a brain injury.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. I'll say, I'll kind of preface that, if that's all right, with
Yeah,
from
however.
a communication standpoint, that again, I think general population, but also in TBI population, I think it's a good rule of thumb in general. Um, when you'd come into the spot, even as a client, and then obviously as an employee as well, actually expressing where you're actually at and how you actually feel. I think, unfortunately, as society as a whole, maybe as men or as other groups as well, just saying good or fine are the only two. I've heard people joke about that a lot. Those are the only two acceptable replies when someone asks you how you are. Good means I'm good. Fine means I don't want to share, or I shouldn't share, or don't care to elaborate. But I would say, both as a client, and how to help you get the most out of your session, but then also as a fellow employee or coworker, saying, hey, today I'm messed up. I woke up with a 20% battery, and I might need a little help, or at the very least some grace, or understanding, and meeting me where I'm at. You don't have to do anything extra, but just know where I am and how we can kind of fit the pieces together so everyone can be on the same page. But even sometimes, through those conversations of being very straightforward, that's something that I've tried to echo, to kind of honor myself and my own emotions and my own experience as a human. I think speaking to how you actually feel is very cathartic and very powerful. But sometimes I'd,
Yes.
I'd see you showing up to work, showing up, which is awesome, but glossed over, like, almost with shark eyes, or I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but looking almost past me or through me. And as a friend and someone I care about, difficult to see someone go through that. But again, prefacing that with the situational reality of, hey, this is where I'm at, this is how I am. But opening those conversations, I think was really powerful. But seeing you show up in those different ways and kind of address what needed to be addressed with kind of the kit that you're showing up with. But even having that conversation of, hey, sometimes I'm only gonna have 20% battery. So, work might take 19% and then I'm, dialing in on recoup for the rest of the day. So kind of witnessing that, um, and also coining, the trifecta, not to divert too much, but
Right.
really committing to self-care and seeing that split between work life and health balance, I think was cool to see as well.
So, what I hope a survivor can hear from that, and I hope a caregiver and a family and a friend can hear from that, is it's really not healthy for us to mask. I understand the rejection is very hurtful and very harmful. And if anything, the rejection and if people show up like that to me, that has been a filter for me, a filter of that you don't get to stay in my life. Like either you're gonna be here and try to support me and love me, and your actions are gonna show that, or you're not. And just because you have a hard time accepting my reality doesn't mean that you get to deny me as a person, and so to for me showing up and saying, hey, this is where I'm at today. And I would do that. And I do that every time you
Yeah.
see me, right? I literally show up and you ask me how I'm doing, and it's not a BS answer. It is to the core, how I'm doing, what I'm feeling, and, how I'm going to go and approach and navigate that. And I think that's the other part that is important that I'm really grateful that you see and saw was my intentional effort to always be working towards regulating myself, right? That's what the sensory deprivation salt floats, and even to see my glassy stare when I'm not present, when I'm very disconnected with myself, right? You know, a lot of us survivors, like we feel so unseen in so much of that regard. So, I didn't know you were seeing that, and that helps me know, okay, it is a little bit more visible. But then the hard part for me is that the mirror and the reflection I get back from a lot of society is that they don't see that at all because they don't acknowledge that, right? And they treat me like I'm still a normal person, like I should be functioning in that moment. And even in the times when I've asked for grace, when I've shown up and I've been very irritable, right? There's been times I've been very irritable with you. I've been very snappy with you, right? And what was it like being on the other side of that,
Well, I'll say, luckily, I have had a lot of, experience in personal, professional, and otherwise with, you know, conflict resolution or kind of high stakes stuff. So luckily not a beginner in that avenue, but again with the preface of, hey, I'm cranky, I'm messed up, I slept an hour, here's where I'm at. Then when you see some explosivity or some anger or whatever kind of comes up, irritability, I can say, aha, that's why I'm already kind of front loaded with that information. So then I don't take it personally. I know Lolly's not mad at me. He's just at such a you know, heightened state, or however you want to put that, sensitivity, or however you want to put that, where, I can kind of bob and weave how I need to for maximum efficiency for myself. It's the same with, asking someone, how can I help you? That's kind of another nice tie in here. Do you just need me to hold space and listen? Do you want advice? Do you want to tap me in, coach, and I can jump in? And if it's something that might take me 2 minutes, even for example at work, right? If you're having a technical issue or something's just making you, frustrated because it's not connecting, and again, you can kind of see the spiraling happen. Hey, I'll solve that for you. Can you use your wordsmithery to write some copy for these advertisements, or whatever the case may be? So again, having those communications. But another key point, which I've brought into a lot of other relationships, or even notice about myself, is when someone's at such a heightened state, this is a really big key here that I think maybe a lot of people don't know. I was kind of baffled by this in a good way. When someone's
Right.
at such an overwhelmed state, whether that's, zero battery, or just way overstimulated, sometimes any amount of additional input, i.e., don't take it the wrong way, you talking to them or kind of trying to help too much, you're actually just digging away with more data you're making more work for them to process. So, my understanding, when you have a traumatic brain injury, once your battery's out or once you're totally overstimulated, that's kind of a wrap. So sometimes when you're in these heightened states, I'll kind of just let you naturally kinda guide
Drop.
back down. I might put my hand up, if I have some input, but I know if I kinda just keep peddling words, 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 I'm actually kind of stripping more energy from you, driving you into a deficit, maybe negative, and, that's not helpful at all. So, to kinda highlight a couple of those instances, or I think maybe after some of those instances, you had provided me some very helpful context with, hey, when I'm in these states, any additional words is just kind of driving me more into an exacerbated state further. So I think
Into a more
asking,
aggressive state, to
yeah,
be honest.
yeah, like unintentionally poking the bear, like all your intents,
Yeah.
as a bystander or caregiver or whatever, is to help, and the kind of unfortunate irony there is you're just adding kerosene on the fire there. So I think that was an important piece for me to understand, because I had tried to ask, in other scenarios, like how can I best show up, or how can I best help you, but just knowing that adding additional words even when you're trying to help is just heightening the state, or can kind of add more agitation, if that makes sense.
And as you started this off with, first thing that I told you and you remembered was, "Thank you for listening."
Yeah.
How do you have that understanding, Nico? Because I've communicated that to you. I've
Yeah.
communicated to you that I have a brain battery, and I communicate to you that when that gets exacerbated, that I no longer have control, and that I start getting very irritable and everything starts to feel like an attack. And so any little piece of information coming at me, and so thank you for listening. Thank you for trying to hold space. And sometimes as a brain injury survivor and caregivers and friends and colleagues, is you can try to do the same thing that worked one time and it doesn't work that time because I might not calm down. And we've been in that situation too, right? Where,
Yeah.
and really what I hope people are seeing as they watch this is, Nico, you're the example. You're exemplary in how a caregiver or a family or a friend should show up with curiosity, asking, "How can I support you?" And I might not have that answer. The thing is you caught Lolly at chapter 20. Now I'm at chapter 30, but you caught Lolly at chapter 20. So I had the ability to communicate those things as opposed to in the beginning when I wouldn't have. And then you would be wondering, well, what is wrong with this guy? Like,
Yeah.
none of that would make sense. You would take everything that I was saying personally because I might have said it really sharp. I might have said it with an aggressive tone, and I might have said a personal attack, that
Yeah.
isn't meant for you, right? But particularly, there have been moments where you've helped me calm down. Either you've given me a hug, you've asked if I'd like a hug, whether I'm crying, whether I'm angry, whether it's just holding space and just acknowledging that you're holding space for me is been wonderful for me. But I do remember particularly we had a meeting and things were getting to a boiling point. And this was the first time for me that my TBI rage became public to anybody outside of my family, really, and
Ah,
maybe some of my very close dear friends that have been on the phone or in my home because I'm very intentional on not putting myself in situations, and quite frankly, I do have concerns that the more I'm out and about in society dysregulated, that it may show up and I might have very dear consequences to that, like jail or beating someone up
Yeah,
or, whatever escalation happens in that moment. And so, and that's great. And I'm grateful that I've done the work to become present so that I can be aware of why these things are coming up so that I can avoid and prevent them. But I can't always all the time, especially when I have job requirements and I have to provide for myself. And as you've watched me trying to provide for myself in this navigation of learning how to provide for myself financially as a brain injury survivor while honoring myself, while not putting myself in the grave by working myself too hard. And even then, I've worked myself too hard, which gets me to our meeting. I had worked myself too hard. I had some resentments and I was very frustrated with some of the things that were going on. And we don't need to get into those details, but I got very elevated
for sure.
and and in front of the entire team, our boss, our owner, our dear friend, who I will be doing a ready to face the mirror because, as we both know, I raged on him a second time. So walk me through that. What was that like, for you to that would have been the first time you really saw like me step out of character, step out, and the time when you couldn't call me.
Yeah, the time I couldn't call me, I didn't know if you meant particular in that moment or in
In that
another
moment, you
ones.
couldn't call me.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, so
know,
I'll say, I mean, things were kind of slowly accelerating. Um, again, too, I generally speaking try to be a mediator, or I do feel like in general I naturally or do try to bring kind of a gentle tone in some regards. But you could kind of feel I'm a big kind of feeler type guy, but you could feel the air kind of heat up in the room. Felt a little heavier. I think you stood up. There was a lot of flailing. Um, I did see you become, visibly red, and a lot of the intensity kept going up. We kind of joked about this even a couple days ago, actually, where I kind of looked at you and with love, I kind of gave you the maybe try to bring it down a little bit, buddy.
yeah,
Again, sometimes
yeah,
it's too late. Again, that was just my kind nudge. Um, I did also try to make eye contact with others to kind of you know in an attempt to kind of, I don't know how to explain, show support or kind of gauge the room, see where everyone's at. I will give you some credit, although might have been an uncomfortable scenario for obviously yourself and others.
everyone.
Yeah, everyone, down to the plants in the room. No, I'm just kidding,
Yeah,
but
right.
plants are walking away.
Like, oh
You did,
shit.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. You know, you did stand up, and I think you kind of came to this in a very high boil, again, very distraught at a very high boil. I think you said, "I need to take a walk. I can't do this right now." There was some kind of back and forth between you and the owner. Again, I tried to kind of throw some stuff in to, maybe balance out, or again too, there were some points being made across the whole meeting. We're all kind of trying to balance up, but again, overall it kept kind of increasing in intensity. But you did hit this moment of realization, which again, major credit and props for, where I think you said, I need to go on a walk, I need to remove myself. And then you stood up, walked
Yep.
out, took a couple laps. Again, we all did kind of exhale, and I do remember saying, hey, there are some points that I think Lolly did make. Maybe delivery. We'll kind of we'll kind of figure that out. But we might just need to kind of course correct and process and maybe revisit this. I did try to play the balance between having your back, but also general context, some, justification, but also, ultimately it's your conversation. You also, I think, if I'm not mistaken, apologized to everybody and kind of came
Yeah.
back with a different orientation and vibe. But again, I did feel a little bit like I wanted to give a little context or kind of uh I don't know how to explain it. Counterbalance a little weight in the room just because everybody was a little kind of uh tense
A
and
bomb went
whatnot.
off, and I was the
Yeah,
bomb.
yeah, and so
For
yeah,
real,
yeah, yeah,
like, all of a sudden, I'm sitting there, they're having a meeting, we're having a meeting, I'm not saying a word, I'm trying to keep, my cool, I'm letting everybody speak, and then finally, the one thing that got said, and I just it was a straight up explosion, right? And
yeah, yeah,
that's what I
yeah,
really want people to understand is this wasn't light by any means. Like, this was
yeah.
I got hot and I exploded in front of everybody, and it's very unprofessional, and it's not like me. It's very
Nice.
much out of my character. It is not who I am. I don't do that. I very much live my life by principles of love and respect, and everybody knows this. So when this version of me shows up, it is really confusing. And I've done videos about, one of the hardest parts is when you walk back in the room and you were the bomb. You know that you were, the atom bomb and you were the vacuum and it sucked all the air out of the room and
Yeah,
and that you're the reason why everybody's uncomfortable. And some of us can accept that, some of us can realize that depending on where we're at in our journey. And not everybody can be real with themselves and is ready to face the mirror. I always Accountability was never my issue. It was the compassion and grace, not beating myself up. And
mm,
so for me, I remember seeing you try to bring me down.
yeah, I was
And
like,
it didn't matter inside of my head. It was like,
yeah,
no, I had lost complete control. And that
yeah,
moment
yeah,
you talk about, like I stood up and I said, it was like I had a realization. I came back into my body because I
yeah,
disassociated, because I just exploded. It was too much for me. And when I came back into my body, I recognized I was the pit bull and I wasn't going to stop. And I was going to keep going until everybody was just beat up. And I knew it. I'd done it before. This is not the first TBI rage I'd been in. And
yeah,
so
yeah,
and that is a testament of the work that I do, is being able to be present enough to say, I need to remove myself. And then I stepped outside. I did the work. I calmed myself down. I said, you are safe. You are safe. You are calm. They didn't deserve that. And you have some apologies to go make, And I did. I walked in and I apologized to everybody, and everybody gave me compassion and grace.
yeah. And I think that's important. A because walking back into the room, I think you nailed that. Not easy, not easy
Not
to
easy.
probably inside. It's
Hey,
like f this, I'm out, permanently,
you're
or
on a run, man.
yeah, the short walk around the block becomes the walk home. Like that's probably a tempting
Mhm.
thought and whatever. So yeah, kudos for coming back in, having that convo. I do think it's a nice kind of connecting thread too. You know, did we as a team or a group handle that well? I think another kind of connecting point is, in that initial topic we had of when you reach that point, again, that's why I was, and, telepathy is kind of hard, but I was trying to look around the room and kind of like, give everyone like, hey, let's give a little space here. Um, but I'm kind of curious to what is, and sometimes maybe there's no perfect answer,
Yeah.
but in some of those scenarios, is it, let them kind of fizzle out? To your point too, if I would have said, hey, go take a walk, that probably would have gone differently potentially, rather than, you coming to the realization. But I'm kind of curious too, from our perspective or on us, how that was handled. I'm kind of curious as well, but
I think for the most part it was handled, I mean, as well as anyone could have handled it, and I'm guessing that probably has more to do with me being open and honest about my experiences,
yeah,
and that I had been talking about the rage for a long time, to everybody.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so
that is
then
true.
everyone finally saw it. So what I'm guessing everyone kind of saw was like, oh, so this is what he's been talking about,
Yeah,
and so, I think everyone pretty much gave me the space to just vent. I think that the pushback I was getting from, Bry Guy was, because he was taken back. He had a lot of questions. Why? Why? And why are you like this? And that's a learning lesson that I hope people can understand. Once we get there, leave us be. Do not engage, disengage entirely. Just let me get it out. Like, and it sucks. It's the worst thing. Do you know what it feels like to tell you, let me abuse you?
Yeah,
Do you
yeah,
know what
yeah. It's
that
like take
feels
this.
like to
Yeah, it's like
just let me abuse you because it's gonna fucking happen now and I'm not gonna be able to stop it. Like that's a very hard thing to say. Talk about ready to face the mirror, right? Like that's not an easy thing, but because I've done so much work around the compassion and grace, because my TBI counselor was like, Lolly, you've got to stop beating yourself up. It is a symptom of your brain injury. Yes, you need to take accountability. And yes, you need to recognize that you didn't have control. And I didn't have control. And you watched me lose control. And quite
yeah,
frankly, brother, if I were to ask you in all honesty, if there's anyone in your life that probably has the most control of themselves, would it probably not be me?
yeah. I would say, yeah, 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 yeah.
Am I probably not one of the most emotionally intelligent, self-aware, socially aware people out here? I move with such intention. Most people in my life tell me that I am the most that I'm that person in their life. So to see me lose control should tell you how strong that is, how intense that is, and how it can take me over in a moment's notice. And I am deeply intentional in almost every second of every moment of every day. And you've been my friend for at least a solid good 2 years now. Like,
That is
like
correct.
as a friend. Like and this last year we've really bonded more. And so, uh you've really seen that. And it, it's
Yeah.
it's wild, dude.
It is one, and to your point, yeah, that dichotomy or kind of that contrast that can flip on a dime is kind of wild to experience in a lot of ways. But again, to re-highlight the importance of preface and initial explanation, so it's not as much of a surprise when it happens, and then having the general understanding or some tools to assess and aid, or even as a bystander or a friend. Sometimes I almost, or another one, if you don't mind, with the phone
Yeah.
fairly recently, where like that I mean, not to the same degree as the meeting we were talking about, but there was roadblock after roadblock after roadblock, and then you do hit a point where it's maximum frustration,
Max
and I do
capacity.
remember, yeah, max capacity. And I
Hmm.
remember kind of like kindly, because I did see, I think at one point you had thrown the phone into the couch, not too hard. But and I was like, it's a brand new phone. Uh-oh. But I was trying to throw out little nuggies, like, hey, um, I could take a look at it, and I kind of just wait back on my roost and kind of see if that was, agitating more, or if you were maybe willing or at that point able to receive that input, and take it into consideration. But I remember kind of, tossing little pebbles, conversationally over just to kind of see where they
Yeah.
kind of land, kind of test the waters. You did have a float coming up, and I was like, what about this? It might, work out. We did a couple resets on, it was a data transfer. That's also just shit show in general, I will say. But there were there were, for any
It
time
wasn't
I've
just me, everybody. It wasn't just me. There was a lot of ridiculous technological
technical,
roadblocks.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
what he is acknowledging is my reactions were not rational. They were not
Yeah,
logical.
that's a good way to put it.
They were wildly intense. To the point to where I literally jumped 3 feet in the air and threw my phone into a soft chair because it was putting me. It needed one more thing, or one thing that was supposed to work didn't work. And if it doesn't make sense to me, I lose it. And I came in very dysregulated from the
Oh,
moment
yeah.
I walked into the building, and I
Oh,
came
yeah.
in in a very 10 intensity, you know.
Yeah.
And Nico's like, "Oh no," So Yeah, and thank you for doing the little tests, man. You got to test me, and
Seriously.
in that moment there wasn't much you could do for me. I needed to go float is what I needed to do, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and I think again, not to over repeat, but I think it's a really good through line between a lot of these. You were talking to a phone operator, and I think the first words you said too is, I have a traumatic brain injury. This is overwhelming me. This is intense. I might be kind of paraphrasing here, but
Yep.
then happenstance, serendipitously, you got a almost angel on the line of a call center representative. But I think it's kind of one of those premises in a way where, if you don't ask and you don't kind of put it out there, it is hard to receive that level of accommodation or grace. So I think as hard as it might be, um, to maybe preface and put that out there, I know that's a big vulnerability thing, right? Saying like, hey, this is my condition, this is what I have. Um, not
Yeah,
easy.
it's not comfortable. It's not
Yeah,
comfortable.
it sucks.
And
Like
and
just
especially
having to do that
and it's
sucks.
really not comfortable when we do that to the people who are supposed to love us, and we get condemnation and we get judgment and we get those things. And so we definitely don't want to do that at all anymore. And so we literally stop. And it's why we mask. We don't fake a brain injury, we fake being okay, you know.
Yeah.
And that's a very important thing, and so it is an underlying thread in this conversation, and each one of these conversations do present their own threads for everyone to see, because your experience with me is different than everybody else's experience with me. And
For
that's
sure.
why this conversation is so powerful. Is you get to say the things, and we've had a lot of deep conversations, but you get to say the things to me that you've never maybe felt comfortable to say, or didn't know what to say, or want to ask questions about. Like, this is that time. And I want to point out another example of how you experienced my brain injury is, when I first started working there, it was a game for you to mess with the person who comes in afterwards and put a song on YouTube and have it
Oh, forgot
playing.
about that. Oh, I almost forgot.
And
With good
and
intent. Yeah,
and
with good intent.
well, and I never took it in a wrong way. Not
Yeah.
once did I take it. I only took it as love and playfulness. But what did it do to me? What did I communicate?
Yeah, well, so I'll kind of give a little context, but I think that's key. So I'm a huge music lover, percussionist, all sorts of different
And
stuff.
comedian.
Yeah, I like a lot of different trades. And I like listening to music that, sets the mood, especially at the spa, play some like, little medieval tunes or some dude rocking out on a flute in a beach or, all sorts of stuff to set the mood. So to me, it's like a value add or a vibe where I'm like, hey, if I set up all this music for the close shift or later, they don't have to worry about it. Also, it's a surprise of like what the tune of the day is and
Hmm.
and all that kind of stuff. um, but from my recollection, it's in a Brave browser opposed to the Microsoft Edge and the Chrome, and we have tabs and browsers at the wazoo. There was a couple days where you couldn't find where the music was coming from. And again, talking about sensory input or information to process, having this, annoying ass flute or whatever it ends up becoming, where is it coming from? And, it's just sapping your battery, percent by percent, minute by minute. Me, of course, not
Mhm.
realizing that, but, you're just getting stripped like a Dementor from, Harry
You're
Potter.
just watching me start to melt down.
Yeah, because we'd be in a conversation, you're like, "Ah," like, "Where is that music?" You're like, "It's gotta stop," and seeing you witness that, that's a really wild thing, and I'll admit too, on my end of, things, I tend to have, some, attention or other, quirks where I like to have a lot of stuff to kinda background noise and distract and that
Mhm.
kinda thing. So I'm on a little bit of an opposite end sometimes. I did also start using earplugs, which just to cancel out any noise, which I also love, so I kinda balance the 2. But yeah, witnessing how something with good intent for me, like, I almost was doing it as, like, a gift or, like, a fun whimsical thing, but ended up unintentionally being, kind of a bomb of energy depletion for you. Kind of
Yeah, it
interesting to
was.
watch that difference there, yeah.
Yeah, because I would walk into the shift, and you and I would oftentimes have, a good conversation at the moment I'd walk in, and then we would literally be in the middle of the conversation, and you'd watch me just snap. I'd just be like, "Nope,
Yeah,
can't handle this anymore. Turn it
like,
off.
"Come on,
Turn
done."
it
Yeah.
the fuck off. I can't do it. Turn it off. And so we just finally got to it. Now it became a joke. Like, is the flute down? Is it, is it available for me to find?
Yeah,
Or even, the buzzer.
yeah.
We used to have this buzzer every time you walked in that we had to have in our pocket. And it was on like a level 10, and you couldn't turn the buzzer down. And it was just, oh, man,
Yeah.
how many times did you see me pretend to throw that thing?
Oh, it's bad.
Like
Yeah,
it
it
was,
was bad. 'Cause
it
you
was
had to time it
terrible.
so there's a sensor on the door where we can see, if customers are coming in, and we have a little receiver, and so if you hit the button right when someone walks in, it cancels it out, but if you miss that timer, yeah, it would buzz for straight 15 seconds and fall off the desk, and then, you get all disorganized,
Yeah.
and
And
yeah,
the
it's
worst part, worst part for me is, as a brain injury survivor, say I'm cleaning a tank at the time, and that thing's in my pocket, and I've got things in my hand, and now this thing's aggressively vibrating in my thigh. Now I've got a serious amount of sensation and stimulation into my thigh, and I can't drop the things because I got fine motor skills and dexterity issues, and I really need to get this turned off now.
yeah,
And it would just
yeah,
immediately make my blood boil in like half a second, for no reason at all. And this is just me trying to do an easy, simple job. Like, honestly, like, I mean, not to say the job is so easy, because it does require a lot out of us, but in the other breath, it really isn't that hard of a job in other
yeah,
ways.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
we're it was the hard part really just begins to be the juggle, and that's when I really started to have more and more issues. um, and as I was doing the event coordinating, so but those are some of the ways, and then even you've watched me struggle with the neuro fatigue and the constant. You've seen me hit my head and navigate re-injuries. You've seen
Mhm.
me go into exacerbations, so I believe you understand the difference between a re-injury and when I
Yep.
deplete my battery and my symptoms are like I have a new concussion, but I don't have a new concussion. And you've watched me really just work myself and try to find this balance of work life balance, but it's so much harder when I only can work so many hours a day, right? Like when I left Revive You and I started door dashing. I mean, what, man? At the beginning I had to start floating right before DoorDash, and I'd have to float right after DoorDash for the first couple weeks, right?
Oh, for sure, yeah. Yeah, for sure. Because even change, or changing process and routine, and all that kind of stuff. But I think too, like, a big point that I hear as well is kind of the prioritization, and not being shy to take yourself where you're at. And again, that's something that I've taken from interfacing with you a lot, is even in myself, recognizing when I'm depleted, when I need a recharge, when hey, this is something, again, for folks with TBI, it's at a more obvious level a lot of the time. But if someone says something that shouldn't make me, irritated or mad, I'm like, why did that really bother me? And I think that level of zoom out, or kind of self-awareness, is a really key theme in a lot of this, to
Yeah.
kind of just take it where you're at. Because we've had many conversations where you've had days where you're like, I woke up, I came in to float and do self-care, eat some food, work for a couple hours, just as you said, come back and float, bring my battery up, then work on some of my entrepreneurial and business stuff, then go back out. But yeah, I think that is another really cool theme, is like the grace, and being willing to give yourself what you need, and advocate for yourself. I think that's another, again, very front facing in the TBI world, but another gem, or nugget a lot of people can take home as well.
Yeah. You know, I won't let society tell me how to live.
Yeah.
It doesn't get to tell me how to live. It doesn't understand my reality, and it makes that very clear every day in the ways I have to navigate this world, because it doesn't It does not honor this. It doesn't listen to this. There aren't things out there to truly help people like myself get through this. And so, that's why I do the things that I do and I share the things that I share, and even just last night going to, Meraki Kava bar, I end up in a conversation where people are like, wow, like just hearing your story really makes me step back. And if I see somebody agitated or irritable in public, to really ask yourself, like the model that you and the example you show is asking why, instead of reacting to their anger.
Yeah.
Why would somebody be so angry? What is going on in their life? And meet them where they're at. It doesn't mean you have to show up and get involved. It just means you just need to not have any judgment.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not our
Exactly.
it's not our place to judge them. It isn't our place to judge them. I don't know if they just lost their mom and they feel like there was some injustices to that happened with the family or the hospital, or they just found out that their girlfriend cheated on them or their boyfriend cheated on them, or they have a TBI rage.
Yeah.
You never know. And TBI is everywhere, from mold exposure to contact sports to um car accidents to veterans to police officers to firefighters. I could go on and on and on about all the different ways that people have brain injury, and we're walking around this world, and not to mention traumas, and so people are showing up. Before brain injury, I never thought, oh, I need to think about this. It
Mm.
wasn't anything I cared about. It wasn't in the forefront of my mind. But now it's like I recognize how many millions of people are literally dying, because they feel so alone and isolated, and doctors refuse to acknowledge that what they're communicating, and their friends and their family refuse to acknowledge what they're communicating, that they can't have these conversations. I can have these conversations because brother, you bet your ass the people that were in my life before, I couldn't have these conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think both being that open, being willing to listen, and the ability to have that level of communication, I think is really key. I remember one time we were talking about the statistics of potentially how many people are walking around with traumatic brain injury. Of course, there's a very, very wide scale, from maybe dinging your head just a little bit, or, full on accident, car accident, or whatever the case may be, or mold exposure, like you were talking about. Even for myself, anaphylaxis, that's something I never even, had thought about even remotely, with, having depression or other mood, energy levels, that kind of stuff. Obviously, not to some of the degree of others, but I think a lot of these skills of that we're kind of talking about, you're either gonna meet someone who has TBI. You probably know the stats obviously better than I do. But you're either gonna interface with somebody at some point. You probably already know. Maybe they haven't disclosed. Maybe it's you, and either you might not realize, or it might be a lesser degree. Either way, probabilistically, you're interacting with. If it's not you, you're interacting with somebody. If you interact with like what 10 people a day, I don't know how many, maybe half. I don't know the exact stats, but
There's
um,
2.2 million people a year, brother, that in the United States alone that get a brain injury. 2.2 million people, and every 9 seconds. And so, like, and that's just what's being reported. I mean, first of all, they don't approach a car accident that a car accident gives you a concussion. That's there's no question in my mind, because
yeah,
I understand that the brain is an apple in a fishbowl, and that it's going to slam into the skull, and it's going to
yeah, yeah,
slam into the front and the back of the skull several times, whether they have a helmet on or not, whether or not there's, you slam into something at 25 miles an hour, and that's just 25 miles an hour. You're going to do something to your brain, and it's going to cause some sort of damage, whether that shows up in an MRI or a CT scan. And that's where a lot of this they fail a lot of this. But the mold exposure is everywhere. I mean, and there's so
yeah,
many people being exposed to this neurotoxin, they don't even realize it. So we are interface. I mean, just the numbers we do know about is 2.2 million a year, and those people don't just get healed.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah.
You're adding to the number every year. Like they don't just like I'm starting 8 years. Am I healed? No, this is a life thing for me. So like we're not just getting healed. Just because the symptoms aren't all consuming and present doesn't mean they're not there. Because one of the biggest things I've had to learn through this is all of the subconscious ways that we've changed. And unless you're actually looking for them, you won't find them. Unless you find out that you've been in that situation over and over and over again, and you start to recognize, wait, I used to do this instead of that, or instead of just being angry, that it just feels different, like because you can't put your finger on it. And so, you know, everybody's like somebody's interacting with a brain injury survivor somewhere in their life, whether that brain injury survivor recognizes that they have a brain injury or not, right?
Yeah.
You know, so that's that's why we got to have these conversations. And so real quick before we wrap this up, is there anything that you have seen or learned, like good, bad, the ugly, that you've never been able to express that you might want me to hear, or might
Mm,
want other people to hear from being on the other side of brain injury, whether what it was like to see me angry, whether what it was like to see me sad, whether it was like what you've learned through this, or just what comes up, if anything comes up. I just want to give that space for you to express that as well.
yeah, no, no, I definitely appreciate that. I think one lesson too is that's kind of again, kind of we briefly mentioned it a little bit, but being willing to kind of sit in the discomfort, like that's something again personally that's been very huge for me is whether that's a culture construct or however, just kind of bottling stuff up and moving through it like an assembly line. But being able to see that happen in real time, again, being really close with you, I've been able to see how, overstimulation can affect and end up in an explosion where you kind of mentioned very well, it's seemingly, you know, simple tasks or something that shouldn't have that degree of an explosion, seeing how that can happen. But I think being willing to sit in those uncomfortable situations with yourself and other ones, other people, I think is really key. And just having some grace, man, because we all have different things we're going through, whether that's physically, emotionally, mentally. I guess there's a lot of different aspects. I'll mention another one too. A very interesting life serendipitous happenstance was, my brother-in-law had a very severe brain injury. And and
Hmm.
and that's something that absolutely brought immense sadness and pain and discomfort, to my family. Luckily, he's relatively okay, and we're very thankful. But in a lot of ways, he's not the same person. Not saying that's, necessarily bad, but it's been a journey and an adaptation. But a lot of those scenarios where there's no right answer, and just being able to sit in there, I'm very thankful to have someone like you in my life, both as a friend, as an expert in the field, having a lot of resources, whether that's, you know, um, informational videos that you put out there. I think very graciously that cover a wide range. Um, but being able to have the confidence and comfort to put my feelings and my experience out there, having that situation happen in my life and for my family was very difficult because I'm not used to having those hard conversations and crying or saying I don't know what to do. There's no answer maybe. But I wanted to express a little bit of gratitude where having someone like you who's been through there, and I can see like a very heightened and direct example of a lot of those irritability and emotions and all that stuff that you wear very honorably and forward facing, that has given me a lot of, practice and resources to then help relate to my family and loved ones. But um I hope that answers the question. But again, I think being able to just sit in the discomfort and being okay with that, and then saying, where do we go from here, with the tools that we have and the relationships we have. And to your point too, there might be some people in your life that just can't manage that, and that's okay.
And that's
That's
okay.
but I think being willing and able to work through it is the key, and having community and people who get that and are willing to grow with you, I think is the key.
Thank you for the reflection of the mirror today, brother.
Pleasure.
What you share with me is that, you know, um, I am so vulnerably me. I am so authentically me that either you're going to be able to sit in it with me or you're not. Because I didn't get to choose my reality, but I do get to choose my reality and how I approach it. And so, therefore, I choose to live my life out loud. And if that makes people uncomfortable, then I ask them to ask themselves why. What is it that I'm showing you that you're unwilling to accept about yourself? Is it the freedom to be yourself? And I give people, from what I'm hearing and what I've constantly heard, is the permission to sit. I don't run from it. I sit in it and I show you that I'm sitting in it. And I say, can you come alongside me and sit with me? I could really use some help right now. It's pretty dark for me. And either they can or they can't. And if they can't, that's okay. But you might not be right for my life. And that's okay too, because, and so I think it's important that we continue to show up in our authentic, vulnerable self so that we give others the permission to show up or not, or permission for themselves to also ask people to sit in the darkness with them, right? And if we would just show up for each other, because sometimes we do just need someone to sit with us, because there is no answer for this, and so, um, taking it one step, one breath, one moment at a time, keeping an open mind, an open heart, and open ears for continued growth in whatever it is, life, the mirror, and anything that is happening in what it's seeing, feeling, and hearing. And what is it teaching us? How is it showing up for us? So, with that, brother Nico, thank you for being a part of this journey with me. Thank
My
you for
pleasure.
loving and supporting me and accepting me and having compassion and grace with me and giving me permission to not be okay, for being a part of that support system, for being a part of the tribe that, as we all know, in my tribe, I have one major rule, and it is reciprocity is the bare minimum. And I
Yes.
thank you for being a part of that with me, brother. So I love you, man.
Love you too, man. It's been my pleasure, and I'm really happy to be here. It's been an honor.
Perfect. I think a lot of people will get something good from this. So, with that, thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day. See you at the next episode of I'm Ready to Face the Mirror.
Ciao.